I go around universities and have challenging conversations, and because that's what is so important to our country, is to find our disagreements respectfully, because when people stop talking, that's when violence happens.
Charlie Kirk was murdered yesterday. While the murderer hasn't been apprehended yet, it is likely over his views. He was murdered in one of the events that he was known for, an event where he would hold an event on a college campus, talk to students. He would have this banner, "Prove me wrong," and of course, some people don't want to prove the people they disagree with wrong. They just want to kill them, and somebody did this successfully yesterday. There is a lot to talk about around this, the murder itself, the uh, fallout, which in again many cases is so absolutely disgusting. I am also gonna have my own little rant. I'm gonna go to you, James, first, but I have some stuff to say about how some good people are responding to this. James, your initial thoughts.
Well, of course, there is no grounds for violence in political discourse. There is no place for it. People who are making sane comments about this understand that it's the use of force that is wrong as such. Unfortunately, our culture has declined. The use of force is more and more being seen as morally acceptable. We have United States senators saying, get in their face, confront them. We have Chuck Schumer saying, the Supreme Court will reap the whirlwind. So people have been talking about violence and force, and people have been making excuses for violence and force. They turned the guy who kills the CEO of a health insurance company into a cult hero. And when force and violence are glorified like that, this is the natural upshot. We don't know who the shooter is yet, although we have a lot of good evidence. There's apparently video and photographs. We've got footprints, a palm print. We found the weapon itself. So there's really good evidence here that will lead us to figuring out who this guy is, and I think in short order. But it does not matter what their political ideology is. The use of force in response to words or ideas is always wrong. Miss Rand perhaps said it best in her essay, What is Capitalism? When she wrote, quote, one does not and cannot negotiate with brutality, nor give it the benefit of the doubt. The moral absolute should be if and when, in any dispute, one side initiates the use of physical force, that side is wrong, and no consideration or discussion of the issues is necessary or appropriate. Full stop. Once violence is used, you're in the wrong. Full stop. And there's no excuse that can be made. There's no justification for this. It lies outside of the parameters of rational discourse. When it comes to Charlie Kirk, it is a particularly eloquent demonstration of that point because, as you observed, he went around to college campuses trying to get new ideas which are not represented on college campuses. God knows, for the last 40 plus years, I've been trying to go to lectures at college campuses, and oftentimes the speakers are shut down if the left doesn't like their message. You have to go through a phalanx of protesters, and if you get in there, they're shouted down and you can't even hear the lecturer. I've been there. And here's Charlie Kirk trying to get different ideas on campus, exposing people to that. Prove me wrong, as you point out. And he's shot for the discussion. We don't know the person, and so don't fully know the motive. And in that gap, it is dangerous to use vague pronouns like they. They killed Charlie Kirk. I don't like that at all. But what we can do is connect the dots in terms of the advocacy of force. You remember a few years ago, there was is it okay to hit a Nazi? And there were many people, leftists, and I talked to university students in a non-objectivist context. They are all for the use of force and violence as a political tool. And
Yeah.
so long as that's morally justified, you get this.
Yeah, and I want to get into the issue of political violence in a bit. We're going to go longer than usual with today's episode of the Daily Objective. We're going to go around 45 minutes. I want to start with, again, a comment, and I made this, I made a similar comment on Facebook, and, people who know me know that I very rarely post on Facebook. And I opened Facebook this morning, UK time. I scroll through, obviously, almost every post I see is about this murder, and most of those posts either started with or early on had something like, look, I disagree with Charlie Kirk, but this is horrific. Now, the only reason I'm responding to this at all, and the only reason I posted about this is because I saw such posts from good people, people I respect, people who I consider a force for good in the world, and I consider that very part of their post and the fact that they insist that they saw a need to include it as them moving the conversation very much in the wrong direction. There is no situation. If we were today doing a show about the assassination of, Rachel Maddow or anybody anywhere on the political spectrum, any commentator, um, there's no way I would start with, look, I'm, against this and that policy that this person advocated for. No, I'm against murder. Okay, so let's start with that. If you're against murder, you don't have to hedge. Just be against murder. That's a strong statement. Make that statement. And if anybody thinks, again, if anybody thinks that by saying by you saying I'm against this act of murder, that means you agree with everything Charlie Kirk says. First of all, nobody actually thinks that. If anybody says that to you, they're attempting to move the conversation in a certain direction. Uh, there is no need to qualify your opposition to murder, to political murder, and this is again, it's I think it's very unfortunate. I think people are doing this again to appease not just the worst people, but also the worst elements within people. And no, please don't. Please consider whether this is actually whether this is necessary in terms of clarifying where you stand, and whether it is necessary in terms of what you're attempting to prevent by making that qualification.
That's a very interesting thing to say. I disagreed with him, but violence is wrong. In 99% of murders, since they're not politically motivated, no one even asks the question. For example, this Ukrainian immigrant, this young girl who's horribly killed recently, and it's been a big news story here in the States. Um, no one inquires into her politics. No one cares. It's not, doesn't even come up. We say it was a horrific murder of an innocent young woman, which is the correct way of approaching it. Now, when there's a political motive, that what they're conceding when they say, I disagree with him, but what they're conceding is that there's likely to have been a political motive. Now, assassins, killers are obviously acting irrationally, and so they're on some level on the psychological spectrum, but evil is perfectly consistent with psychological problems. The fact that there's a psychotic nut out there does not necessarily mean he's guiltless or that wasn't politically motivated. So because the political motivation of the shooting, they jump in to say, I disagree with him, as they would never do in any other kind of murder. So in general, I agree with your position. That is to say, you wouldn't do this with any other murder. You'd say murder is wrong. Full stop. That's where we begin. And this is certainly not the time to explore that, your differences with the guy. And you're right. What's interesting is that if it was a leftist who'd been killed for political reasons, I wonder if these same people would have to start out that way. They want to dissociate themselves. A lot of good objectivists, as you point out, want to dissociate themselves with the contemporary right. And I understand that motive as well. On the other hand, there is no need, there is no necessity at this point to say, I disagreed with him. But, like Ayn Rand suggested, the discussion ends when someone says, I can initiate force. There's no moral justification. There's nothing more to say. This guy was killed very probably precisely because he was a political activist. Charlie Kirk was a peaceful political activist. He wanted to discuss, prove me wrong. The fact that he wanted an open dialogue and discussion is precisely why he was killed. So the issue is free speech. Now, we normally think of it in terms of government action because government makes any one criminal look like a piker in the history of rights violations. I understand. But we have a government to protect us from shooters like this so that we can say whatever we want. No words, however offensive, however much you disagree with them, no words by themselves can ever justify violence. I don't care how offensive, rude, angry, mean, politically you disagree with them. And the justifications, like the CNN guy said, well, this guy was always advocating hateful things. And so with the implication, well, he should expect getting shot in effect because he says hateful things. You can argue about what the guy said, but even if he said hateful things, it does not justify political violence. This was murder, and it was murder because someone disagreed with what he said. Now, they appear to have found the gun and the bullets. They're likely to find who this guy is pretty quickly. They've got palm print, they've got footprints, they've got the gun, they've got video and photos. So we're likely to know who this guy is in short order. Whether they catch him or not, let's pray God I'm an atheist, but let's pray God they catch the guy because they will be able to identify him. Apparently on the bullets and on the gun were trans slogans and Antifa slogans. And so we begin to get a sense of what this guy may have been motivated. But remember, like I say, when we found the Trump assassins, the attempted Trump assassins from last year, they turned out to be lone nuts. And there could be some other evidence I'm not aware of, but let's not sweep up the entire left and everyone, although we can sweep up left and right with the advocacy of force, because both sides increasingly seem to think that force is okay to deploy in political differences. It is not. Free speech is a necessity. People have to be able to feel free in expressing any opinion, or our democracy really is threatened. But the point is, we don't blame they in a vague, nebulous way. There, I would jump in to say it would be wrong to blame a nebulous they. On the other hand, there is a nebulous they, kind of on both sides, that advocates the use of force because of political disagreements. That is just wrong.
Yes, although, and again, we'll get to this soon, but I think there's one side that acts on it certainly in recent years a lot more than the other. That does not again not an endorsement of the other side. It's bizarre that this is a part of the conversation. But anyway, let's get to that in a second. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, Bull Moose, for the super chat. Bull Moose says, I have a lot of respect for what Charlie stood for, and it feels like I lost a close friend. And you see people celebrating his murder, it makes me feel physically ill. Yeah, I also expect that we're gonna do more shows about this in the coming days and weeks. But yeah, it's really it really is something to see people on social media celebrating. But yeah, you mentioned CNN. There was I think it was on MSNBC where somebody says maybe it was celebratory gunshots from the MAGA crowd, which I've never ever heard of a MAGA event with celebratory gunshots. I've heard of celebratory gunshots among the Arab savages that MSNBC supports, but I've never heard of it. So they on some mainstream left-wing media outlets, they actually, seemed to try to celebrate it in a subtle way. Thank you, Benjamin, for the super chat. Benjamin says, I'm not here to support Kirk, but he didn't deserve to end like this. It's repugnant to see people resort to serving lead instead of arguments. Yes, but again, it in what world does it imply that you're supporting a person if you say they shouldn't have been murdered?
I
In
know
what world is that the case? And James, you pointed this out. You don't read a story about a person who's not famous being murdered and say, hang on, before I decide if this was right or wrong, who did he vote for? What was his opinion on, high-speed rail to between London and Birmingham? It's that's not a part of the conversation, and it shouldn't be. This is murder. It's always wrong.
that is really the key here. And there is a disturbing increase in political violence. There's no question. You know, back in 2020, the George Floyd situation, those mostly peaceful protests were not peaceful protests at all. They were horrifically violent. I just have to observe Donald Trump. They had two different assassination attempts. Here I am using that they. These were both lone nuts, but consider there were two assassination attempts on him. Consider the CEO of the health insurance company who was gunned down on purpose, and they made him a folk hero. Now, that is exactly the sort of mentality that is going to encourage violence, random, in effect, killings. You say it's not random. It was Charlie Kirk. It was a CEO. Okay, right. We now zero in on the politics of these people who think it's okay to use force. But on the other hand, I would point out that the Minnesota legislators who were shot down just weeks ago, that was a right wing thing. I would point out that January 6th, it may not have been the 2020 George Floyd riots, but January 6th was an act of political violence. It is becoming increasingly okay on both sides to use violence in political differences. That is the end of our civilization. That is the end of the American Republic. If that notion, the use of force to settle political differences, sinks in. Now, can I make a judgment as to who's worse, left or right? Yeah, I think the left is worse in this regard. Once upon a time, I would have really, decades ago, I really would have said, with only the 60s and 70s to inform me, I would have definitely said that the left are the ones who are advocating political violence, and the right is comparatively civilized. That is eroding. That is changing. There is a fascist convergence on both left and right that think it okay to use force or violence when it comes to a political dispute. That is always wrong. That is always wrong.
I was looking, I think it may have been yesterday or the day before, at some of the newspaper headlines from the South, from the lynchings, the newspapers that justified it, that explained, that actually celebrated the lynchings. And I was looking at it in the context of people who support the Palestinians and the headlines that we see today in support of Palestinianism, which is the most murderous ideology, out there, at least in the mainstream. But yeah, scrolling through social media, especially Twitter, which is of course a cesspool, you do see many, many people supporting this, and the irony of anti-fascist slogans on the gun that you use against to shoot somebody for going to debate people, for expressing a view that is against yours. The mental gymnastics these people have to go through to get to the point where they think they're anti-fascists rather than identical to the fascists in this sense.
That's brown shirt behavior right there, just like
Absolutely.
street violence is. Just like you remember the discussion that was several years ago, at least in my country, in the States, there was a discussion: is it okay to hit a Nazi? Now, if a guy if Nazis are in government, that's one situation. But if someone is just advocating an idea, no matter how horrific that idea is, if they're not actually inciting violence, if they're not actually conspiring to commit murder, no matter how hateful, disgusting, awful what they say is, does not justify violence. And yet there was a huge contingent of people, especially on the left, who thought, yeah, it's perfectly okay. You identify Trump supporters as Nazis, it's okay to punch them in the face. No, it is not okay to punch Trump supporters in the face. I don't care how strongly we disagree with Mr. Trump or about what issue. It is not cool to hit someone because you have a political difference with them, no matter how hateful what they say is. I repair back to what Ms. Rand said in What is Capitalism, a really brilliant essay. The discussion ends when someone initiates force. I'm not going to listen to their justification. There is no justification. Full stop.
Yeah.
There can be none. And any mouthing of excuses for violence is where the problem lies, because that's what's encouraging the violence in the first place. Making Luigi, this guy who killed the CEO, making him a folk hero is giving people the moral green light to go use force and violence.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Thank you, Shauna, for the super chat. Shauna says MSNBC is so out of touch that they try to blame this in an outdated trope of the right. And we have a few. Oh, I was going to read your comment, Deborah, but you deleted it. But you mentioned you're from. Well, maybe I won't mention where you're from, but yeah, I will. I will still say what I was going to say without mentioning that. This is why I think the political, when it comes to political violence, the left is worse than the right in practice today, and in recent years. We saw what we saw in 2000 with Antifa, with Black Lives Matter, with really racial terrorism across the U.S. And it went unanswered, pretty much. I mean, in some places the police did some things, but this was encouraged by many in the political class. This was Biden defended it in the 2020 debate. He defended Antifa. He defended terrorists. On October
Kamala
7th,
Harris said, keep it up.
well, on October 7th, people in America as well as here in London, took to the streets to celebrate the mass murder of Jews and have since been taking to the streets daily around the world to celebrate it, to advocate for it, and we see eventually also to act on it. When you mentioned the murder of the United Healthcare CEO, I was in the U.S. recently and I was watching on TV. Um, I think it was Saturday Night Live, but sort of clips from previous shows, and one of them may have been from shortly after that happened. And the guy just mentions the name, and in one of those kind of news type segments, and the audience, applauds. And that is really, you should be terrified even if you are not likely to be a target of such an assassination, because again, this moves the conversation. It first of all, it brings in more violence as sort of a legitimate part of the conversation. And remember, there is no rational alternative in the mainstream. Now, this is where I'm going to go on another rant that may get us canceled by our own people, but we're advocating here for Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism, which, of course, the more it's adopted, the more widespread it is, the better the world will be. But we have failed as a movement so far. Overall, these ideas are true and should have been accepted much more easily had we done better. And I say we, I include Ayn Rand Center UK. I look at things we've done, and I'm very proud of what we do. But the fact is, we're the fringe in the field of ideas. Tribalism isn't just the mainstream view; it's the consensus view. It's not a consensus on which is the right tribe. Different tribes are fighting against each other, but everybody agrees that that is the way. And the violence doesn't take long to follow.
This is true. For decades, the Democratic Party has basically ignored the ideas of their opponents. They've demonized their opponents. And I have to say that one of the problems with Donald Trump is that he has adopted the Democrat strategy in demonizing his opponents. He'll come up with these, pet names for his opponents, even within the Republican Party. Remember when he ran back in 2016, it was Lion Ted Cruz. And he'll, the use of, demonization rather than talking about the issues has become increasingly the reality in political discourse. I would say both in my country and generally in the West, which is really sad, because this is the end of civilization. If we get to the point where you deserved it when it comes to force becomes, the rational line, because what? You belong to the other tribe. Yeah, tribalism is inherently wrong. And that's why I would caution people against saying they killed, formulations that use the vague pronoun they. They killed Charlie Kirk. No, someone killed Charlie Kirk. But there is a broader ideology we can blame. The ideology that says force is cool. And that we do hear from politicians. And every politician who is involved in the uber demonization of their opponents, or the calls for violence, even implicit calls for violence, or the justification of this. Well, the guy said hateful things. What could he expect? If you go down that road, then you are advocating the ideology that will set this loose. Political violence right now is getting so bad, given what happened over the last, say, 14, 15 months, so bad in my country. It's, I think, the worst it's been since the 1960s. Now, the 1960s did see JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King Jr. get assassinated, real violence in LA riots and university protests, but not since the 60s has political violence been such an ugly reality in my country. And it is becoming disturbingly, and in a way it's worse than the 1960s, because the response to that violence was a little better when it came to serious voices. Today, many serious voices do advocate for force or violence, but be careful in ascribing blame with a vague term like they. That is tribalism. That's part of the tribalism. That's the point. I don't care what tribe you belong to. Violence isn't cool. That has to be the message. Otherwise, civilization is toast.
I think somebody heard me use they about the left in this context, even though I didn't say it on Twitter. And I want to get to that in a second. But thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says, for as long as there's rule of law, you would not even be allowed to get rid of Hitler, only after the enabling vote of 1933. Thank you, Gail, for...
Oh, may I say something about that?
Sure.
The brown shirts got away with murder. Hitler's, the thugs, and you know what he did is he converted the group of street thugs into the SS. Yeah, the Weimar Republic failed in shutting down Nazi violence before the election of Adolf Hitler. I would just observe. Now, it's true, there was this cultural wave of basically the choice the Weimar Germans had was the communists versus the Nazis. Nice choice. But see what happens to a culture when violence gets accepted. When force and violence become cool to achieve your point. And the debate becomes between the communists and the fascists. But no, the Weimar Republic had a duty to shut down Nazi violence and failed to do so during the rise of Nazism, I would observe.
Thank you, Gail, for the super chat. Okay, there's some discussion about civil war. El Rito says America's too lazy to start a civil war. Do not count on that. This is a bad time in where political discourse is, when killing people is a part of it.
And Americans are generally not lazy.
Yeah.
If they get a wrong idea in their head, they can be very dangerous indeed. Americans. While I would defend the American sense of life in general, especially as you go back in time, over other cultures' senses of life, and I don't mean that in a jingoistic way at all, but I have to point out that if Americans get the wrong idea in their head, they can be monsters too.
Okay, I want to talk about something I said on Twitter, and somebody who self-identifies as an objectivist came after me over this, and I actually was going to respond to them, but then I looked at their profile and saw that they're kind of sort of okay with murdering, Charlie Kirk because of his views, so I decided not to engage directly, but I wonder if other people read that tweet the way that person read it. So I said something to the effect of, that this is a part of the ideology of the left, and I stand by that. If you are going to consistently apply left-wing ideology, real left-wing ideology, it has always been about killing people you disagree with. Now, that does not mean that everybody who voted for Harris is going to commit the next political assassination. Of course not. By the way, not everybody who voted for Harris is a leftist. Some of them just voted out of disgust for Trump, which is understandable. But yeah, keep that in mind. If you are consistent, and I'll put this also in the context of when we say Islamic terrorism, does that mean that everybody who goes to pray in a mosque on Friday is going to blow themselves up in a bus? Of course not. The vast majority don't. I don't know what the percentage who support it or not. I don't really care. But yeah, it is people people with bad principles. It's great that some of them aren't principled enough to fully follow their principles. It would be better if they were principled but with good principles. But yeah, that is how you judge the ideas. You judge and you judge people on the ideas they hold. And yeah, you should judge leftists based on the ideas they hold, and if they're more consistent, they're more likely in part to at least celebrate this, as many are. And again, not just random people on social media, but influencers on social media and people on mainstream media. Um, so yeah, keep that in mind. The fact that not everybody practices their ideology, good when the ideology is bad, but it is important to point out that ideas matter.
Yes. Unless you are an objectivist, or let me try and be as kind as I can be, as generous as I can be, a really consistent classical liberal, you are in favor of government using force in policy. In policy, government is wrongly violating our rights and forcing us around all the time. All the time. Government regulations, laws, taxes, all kinds of government force is used. If someone is advocating the use of government force, that just makes them a standard member of the left or the right, frankly, because they advocate the use of force as a political instrument. Now, I would say that the advocate, so there's some objectivists out there saying, well, Trump, you see, and Kirk advocate this use of force in immigration, and they're being so violent, using government in such a violent way against immigrants. Of course, Charlie Kirk should have expected this. That is so wrongheaded because, look, so long as we have free speech, so long as we have some kind of representative government where we're free to change the government policy, the fact that someone is advocating a government policy is not an excuse for you initiated force against me, therefore I can go shoot you dead. No, no. Free speech is on the edge. This is an assault, in effect, on free speech. Free speech is coming to be on the brink right now. So what we need to do is distinguish between their policy positions and just rank violence, killing people for their opinions. That is a huge distinction that needs to be borne in mind. Now, on the other hand, let me rush in to say, of course, it is precisely those the moral justifications for initiating force in a political context which create this confusion, which create this, okay, it's okay for me to use force against someone whose political ideology I disagree with. Yeah, but until and unless we reach the day where people understand that there is never any excuse for the use of force, initiation of force, in any context, whether it's by a criminal, a government, you name it, it is force and violence being initiated. That is always, put in italics and underline, always wrong. Let's see if I have another appropriate quote here from Miss Rand. I think I do. And of course, from Galt's speech, whatever may be open to disagreement, there is one act of evil that one may not. That act that no man may commit against others, and no man may sanction or forgive. So long as men desire to live together, no man may initiate. Do you hear me? No man may start the use of physical force against others. Galt's speech. Once we concede the right to initiate force against people who are otherwise being peaceful and non-coercive, then we have morally clouded the issue and we've started down that path. I would still make the distinction between those who advocate government policies that would force people, because both sides do that, and just simply the rank and random murdering people because of their ideas. And it's hardly random in that sense, but the rank murdering people because of their ideas. Charlie Kirk was a person who wanted to spread ideas. It does not, and he wanted to do so peacefully on university campuses. There is, for example, let's contrast Mahmoud Khalil, the guy who was the leader of Palestinian protests, some pro-Hamas protests who Trump wanted to evict. He used universities for violence. He used universities to force people, intimidate people to engage in terrorism. Charlie Kirk was using universities to open up a discussion on controversial subjects. There could be no greater moral contrast between the way people want to use the university than, say, Mahmoud Khalil versus Charlie Kirk. I think that's a vital distinction to bear in mind right now.
Also, you know, what he was doing, and yeah, he was posting clips of him debating leftists. That is another thing that's becoming so increasingly rare. I don't remember which year this was. It must have been 2008, when either 2008 or 2012, when Obama was the first one to pull out of the Democratic primary debate on Fox News, because they would go on the different channels, and they would debate. By the way, the Republicans still have debates on CNN. I don't know if MSNBC, but he decided, I don't want to be I don't want to be on a debate in the channel that's viewed the most watched of the news channels, but it speaks to people I don't like. And so going on university campuses and speaking to leftists when you're not one is pretty amazing. And he got people to actually have conversations with him. And Yeah, that was amazing. And I guess that must have been really terrifying to people who really want to see bad left-wing ideas take over. I want to say there's more talk in the chat about civil war, and another thing with, if there's a civil war in the U.S. now, there are no good guys. There are no. It's two anti-American sides fighting each other for the future of America. So let's really try to steer away from that. And
Thanks for really depressing me, but yeah, that is the context that we find ourselves in. But you bring up your example about Obama not wanting to debate on Fox is actually interesting in this regard. If you hear whatever you think of Donald Trump, or however critical you are of Donald Trump, when you hear someone saying, well, we can't legitimize, we can't humanize Donald Trump, we can't give him a platform, we can't give this person a platform, we can't engage with the other side in a verbal discourse, a debate with words. If we don't want to legitimize them or humanize them, what are you saying? They're so evil they can't be spoken with. Now, I hope that there is a parameter in which I wouldn't have to debate a Nazi, right? But we find ourselves in the political context that we find ourselves in. And if you guys can't debate things peacefully, civilization, the American Republic as an experiment is over.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark, for the super chat. Thank you, Robert Naser, for the super chat. Robert says, civil war isn't just an oxymoron, it's an absurdity. Who are the sides? What are the territories? What would the prosecution and the resolution of this war look like? Those shouting civil war are fools. Absolutely. Dangerous fools who can actually make that happen. Look, like I said before, there are no advocates of reason in mainstream politics anywhere in the world, including America. There are advocates of tribalism, and they disagree on which tribe, and they disagree on how far they want to go, and they have the disagreements within the tribe, but the mainstream ideas in political discourse are all bad. And all of them, like you said, all of them to some extent have at least this undercurrent of justification of political violence. And
That's what if we're going to make anything that the turning point, if I can use the term, I guess pun intended, if we want to make focus on an issue, what we need to focus on is the use of force, the use of violence, which can never be justified in a political context if you have free speech and a peaceful means of settling your disputes. Once you've crossed that line, okay, it's time for a revolution. We have not yet crossed that line. So what we need to focus on is force. Force and mind are opposites. Collectivists are mystics. If they put some, whatever the group is, your nation, your religious group, your race, your nationality, whatever that tribe is, capital S society, we are ignoring the reality, the only reality there is. Rozzy, Jim, this person, that person, this person, only individuals exist. Collectivists are mystics, and mystic collectivists at this tribal level are anti-mind. They can't answer it with reason. Reason is the opposite of force. Reason cannot operate in a world of force. You neutralize and negate reason when you have a world of force and violence. Force and mind are opposites. You do not win debates by using force. In fact, assassination in the history, Jim puts on his historian hat right now. Assassination is one of the most counterproductive strategies ever adopted by anyone. The Republicans in the ancient Roman.
We're still on.
Okay. In the ancient Roman Republic, they were trying to defend the Republic. And so who did they kill? Julius Caesar, assassinated on the Ides of March. Within just a few years, Rome has a monarch. It becomes an empire. It was totally counterproductive. The assassination of Julius Caesar stimulated the existence of Caesars ruling Rome. The killing of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was going to ease off on harsh Reconstruction. Well, you assassinate Abraham Lincoln, what do you get? You get the radical Republicans in the Senate going full bore on Reconstruction. The assassination is counterproductive as a policy in any normal context. On the other hand, the other hand, why do I even say on the other hand? Force and violence is never excusable. It's generally counterproductive, historically speaking. It cannot be excused. Assassination is not a valid political tool in the toolkit. And that's what we have to focus on. It is not okay to walk up and hit a Nazi. It is not censorship. All these leftist students that I talk to are university students right now. Oh, sure, censorship is okay. You got to shut down those evil, whatever, whether it's left, right, you name it. There's an increasing demand for censorship that is emanating, by the way, from our universities. That's the enemy. That's what encourages people to do this. There is an ideology that encourages people to do that, and we need to focus on the ideology of force and violence as the enemy. The spotlight here needs to turn. There is no justification for political violence, right or left. Full stop. That's all you need to say here. What happened was evil. This man, Charlie Kirk, was trying to peacefully spread a message which is not frequently heard on university campuses, and he was killed for that pretty clearly, for doing just that. Now, if I know nothing else about the guy who did that, I know he's pure evil, and I know he's the product of a political culture that is increasingly tolerant and accepting of the use of force in political discourse. It is never okay.
Well, I know someone who disagrees with you, who actually thinks maybe we aren't seeing enough political violence or there's too much enforcement against it. That person is leading the polls in the mayoral race in New York City, and on the 24th anniversary of 9/11, we are going to talk about him on the reality show, which starts in a couple of minutes. Thanks, James. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you on the reality show in a couple of minutes.
Be safe.